Hello and welcome to today's session of the PowerVC webinar series. Today is the 94th session of the series. I hope that all of you PowerVC subscribers and your loved ones are staying safe in the strange circumstances we find ourselves with coronavirus. And let me just introduce our speaker for today. It's Chris Gibson. I'm really pleased to have Chris join us. He has vast experience in this area, and he'll be taking us through what to do and what not to do when you're looking at AIX live update. So without further ado, please let me hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Jodie. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Let me stop sharing. Apologies. It's coming up on the screen. Yes, now I can. If you put it on full view. Yes, that's it. Good.
Okay, great.
That's good.
So, okay, so this is my best practices for AIX Live Update for 2020. As Jotty just said in the introduction, my name is Chris Gibson and I work for IBM Lab Services here in Melbourne, Australia. I've been working with AIX for quite a while. I've contributed to a few AIX Red Books over the years. I've written a bunch of articles around AIX and power. I have my own blog, which I write about AIX quite frequently. And I'm also fairly active on social media as well, where I tweet about AIX and power on a fairly regular basis. So I really wanted to set the scene and give people an understanding of what we're going to cover over the next 40 to 50 minutes around AIX Live Update and what you can expect to learn from this session. So this session is really about best practices for using Live Update, or LKU as it's also referred to. And these are examples from the field. This is things that I've picked up, tips, tricks, advice and guidance that I've picked up along my journey of working with Live Updates for the last 5 years, working with different customers, working with different lab services consultants, and working with our AIX development team on enhancing and improving the product over the last couple of years. This session also assumes that you already have some idea about how Live Update works, and hopefully you've maybe used Live Update maybe at least once or twice. So it's not a session that's going to take you into the in-depth, intricate details of how Live Update works under the covers. Although I will discuss it at a very high level, so I'll spend a couple of minutes talking to you about what Live Update is, how you can use it, why you would want to use it. But I'm not going to go into a detailed how-to guide on the types of usages, scenarios of implementing different types of Live Updates in different types of environments. I do have a bunch of resources that I'll talk about towards the end of the session that should answer the typical how-to questions that people have around using Live Update. And no surprise, a lot of it is material that I've written myself, which I'm happy to share with everyone at the end of the presentation. Now, before I talk about my best practices for Live Update, what I wanted to do first was really set the scene for where we are with AIX and our strategy and our roadmap right now to give people an understanding of what IBM's doing with AIX now and into the future. So if you look in the top left-hand corner here, you can see our AIX roadmap, and you can see that it extends out to past 2028 at this point. And we have numerous versions of AIX that are still available, that people are still running in their environments. But AIX 7.2 is definitely a strategic place that we want most customers to be today. If you're running AIX 7.1, you'll also see that that has a fairly good roadmap for the next couple of years as well. If you have AIX 6.1, you would already know that that went to end of service a couple of years ago, although we have had an extended support offering, a fee-based offering, which actually ends at April this year. And of course, AIX 5.3 went end of life last year. So these are really the main levels of AIX I see around the traps at this point in time with many of our customers. Now, I will say that if you're running AIX 7.1, I highly encourage you to start thinking about or moving to AIX 7.2 as soon as possible. And there are two reasons why I tell people to do that. First of all, once you're on AIX 7.2, you can take advantage of the AIX live update feature, which is a fantastic addition to the AIX operating system. And second of all, if you are thinking about or have already moved to Power 9, AIX 7.2 will allow you to run in native mode on that processor, so you can exploit the current and future capabilities of that processor by being on AIX 7.2. So they're my main two reasons for moving to AIX 7.2 as quickly as you can. Support is obviously the other reason, but live update itself for me is personally one of the main reasons why I like people to get onto AIX 7.2 as soon as possible. And of course, we have a bunch of bundled offerings that are still available today with AIX around Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, and the Cloud Edition, which all offer some compelling software bundles when you're looking at deploying AIX within your enterprise. Now, AIX 7.2 itself has been enhanced, and we've been developing it over the last 12 to 18 months extensively, and we've been focusing on those areas that you'd come to know with AIX around scalability, security, performance, etc. And AIX 7.2 has been drastically updated in the last couple of years to improve a lot of those features and give our customers the sort of stability, security, and robustness they've come to expect from the operating system. Now, I'm not going to go through all these details on the slide other than to say, hey, look, we're investing in the technology, we're continuing to develop it. So AIX 7.2, if you're thinking about moving to it, is definitely the right place to go because IBM has your back with our development teams working on this in the back rooms all the time on this technology. But I do want to point out on this slide that you can also see that we are working heavily on AIX live updates. So in recent times, we introduced support and integration for live partition mobility with live updates. And we also introduced some new features around CPU reduction for live update operations, which I'm going to talk about both of those towards later slides in the presentation. So the point being that AIX 7.2 has a very healthy future ahead of it. All right, now I did say I was going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how live update works. I'm not going to go into all the details here other than to give you a nice overview for those of you who may not be overly familiar with how live updates functions in a power environment. So what I have here is a diagram that shows you a power server. And on the left-hand side, I have a VM that is running AIX. It is running some sort of workload. It could be DB2, Oracle, WebSphere, it could be any application. And underneath that, we have the operating system running a particular kernel at a particular service pack, a particular technology level, running AIX. And what we'd like to do to this VM is actually update that kernel to a newer TL or a newer service pack. Now, traditionally, to do that, we would actually have to patch the operating system, stop the workload, and restart that VM for those fixes to take effect. With Live Update, we basically can avoid doing that. What we do is we provision what we call a surrogate VM. That surrogate VM is basically an identical copy of the original. And what we do is, after we've created the surrogate VM, we live migrate your workload from one VM to the other. And very cleverly, underneath that, we also update the kernel. So once your workload has been migrated from one VM to the other, you're already running on the newer version, which could be a new TL, could be a new service pack, or it could be an iFix. And we do all of that using some clever technology that transfers the workload from the original VM to the surrogate, which is completely transparent to the workload. So the advantage here is that you're able to patch the operating system without having to stop these critical workloads. And we do have a number of customers even today that I come across that don't have high availability, they don't have clustering, yet they will have one large LPAR running a very critical database with mission-critical workload on it. So when we say to them, hey, you need to take an outage to install these critical fixes, it can be a real challenge for them and quite a headache. With Live Update, we are really trying to help you minimize those impacts and make it easier for you to patch the OS without taking such a large hit when you need to perform those sort of maintenance activities. We'll quickly point out that there are some requirements for using Live Update, which if you use Live Update, you already know, and that is that everything must be virtualized. So you must have virtual I/O, so virtual Ethernet, virtual SCSI, virtual fiber channel, and you must have virtual I/O servers in the mix here so that we can take advantage of the Live Update feature. And the last point I wanted to make was that, as you can see, there are some disks at the bottom here. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, because this can take a lot of time to explain, but essentially you will need some additional storage in order to support Live Update. It's something that you will need to understand. We create a mirror of your existing root volume group. We also create a new boot disk, which is essentially a mirror of your existing root volume group, to boot up this surrogate partition. So there is some storage required, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. So that's essentially what Live Update does and why you potentially want to use it. Live Update has evolved substantially over the last couple of years, and I want to touch on each of the evolutions as they have come out. So with AIX 72TL0, we allowed you to install iFixes without having to reboot. So this is really, if you like, a tech preview or an introduction to Live Updates. And yes, we could install iFixes, but nothing else. Then AIX 72TL1, we allowed you to install TLs, service packs, PTFs, and iFixes. So we supported the full gamut of fixes. Then in TL2 and TL3, we looked at introducing some simplification and enhancements to the Live Update process itself. We started to introduce support for PowerVC, support for Power Enterprise pools, support for live addition mobility, and some Live Update CPU reduction capabilities. So as you can see, the product and the tool, the feature has really gone through some extensive growth over the time. All right, so let's get into the meat of this presentation. So this is my best practices for AIX Live Update. These are not official IBM best practices. If you're looking for those, then you need to go to this link here. And this link here basically says these are the official Live Update best practices from our IBM development teams who have been working on this product since its inception. So if you're looking for the official list, that's the link that you need to go to. And I highly recommend that you read those before you try and implement Live Update in your environment. As some people may know, I have written about my experiences with Live Update numerous times, but I've called out 3 of the main articles and blog posts that I've written that I have drawn upon to create this best practices list. So the first one here is AIX Live Updates, and that was the first article I wrote about Live Update, and in there I tell you how to install iFixes without rebooting the system. I also spend a little bit of time talking about how Live Update works under the covers, what we do with some of the mirroring of the disks, and some of the functions that are going on there. So if you're looking for an introduction to Live Update, that's probably not a bad place to start. And I've been able to pull some of the information out of there and put it into my best practices document. The second one is how to live update your AIX system without rebooting the server. And that one was written after we introduced the capability to install TLs and service packs without rebooting. And the last one is around using PowerVC managed environments with AIX Live Updates. And in that article, I explored some of the simplifications that were introduced when they integrated in with PowerVC, which was very nice. So I'm going to talk about a lot of the things that are in these articles throughout the rest of the presentation. And again, I just want to reiterate, these are not official IBM best practices. These are purely mine. Fortunately, I have had the privilege of being able to, if you like, work with our development teams on improving some of their existing best practices. They've taken some of my work and I've taken some of their work, and we've been sharing and collaborating together over the last few years. So you will see some overlap between what I've written and what they have in their official link. But yeah, this is really guidelines. They're based on anecdotal data that I've collected while I've been using the tool with customers and other consultants. And I hope that I will continue to update these over the coming years, and I'll add and remove things from the list as I see fit. All right, so let's start talking about my best practices, of which there are 13 that I want to talk about. So the first one is one that should be fairly common to most competent AIX administrators, and that is to always take a MakeSysB. So before you start any maintenance activity on AIX, you make any major changes to the operating system, you should always be taking a backup, and the MakeSysB is what you should be doing. But with Live Updates, I also recommend that you take a clone of your existing root volume group. So use Alt-Disk copy to create a clone to the spare disk before you start the Live Update operation. This way you have a nice, easy, clean way to back out should you run into any problems. Yes, you can use the MakeSysB and recover it from NIM, for example, but having a boot disk sitting there waiting is a much faster, cleaner and efficient way of getting you back to a known and working state. Now, over the years, I've only had to really use that a couple of times, and that was really in the early days of experimenting with Live Update. But even now, I still always take a clone of the existing environment group before we start any operations. So please do that. The second one is one that I decided to include because it's not very well known, and some of the documentation has become a little bit clouded since we first introduced Live Update. So I just wanted to let people know that it is possible to continue installing your TLs, your service packs, your iFixes, as you always have, using SMITs, update all, install P, in Manager, and then you start the live update operation. When we first introduced live update, some of the documentation was not overly clear about that very fact that you could do that. So I decided to include it in my best practices and then show you an example of how you would do that. So in 2018, I was at one of the techies, and I put together a single slide that sort of summarised in a nutshell what you would need to do exactly that, to install fixes and then do a live update. So you can see here on the first bullet point, I've said exactly that. You install your updates plus your iFixes, and then you start the live update operation. So previously, historically, on older levels of AIX, you would install fixes and then reboot for those fixes to take effect. Now our mindset should be install those fixes and then start live update. And that way there's no need to stop those critical applications. And then I've given you basically a very quick checklist of all the things you would need to do prior to starting a live update. I will go over those in a moment, but essentially once you've installed your fixes, you would start the live update operation running this gen install -k command, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So continuing on, in the documentation, it actually also says exactly what I just said. So if you go to the Knowledge Center for AIX Live Updates, you will see it says you can install any updates and interim fixes by using your preferred methods, and then perform a live update operation instead of restarting the system by running the following command, gen install -k. So that's our live update command. So let's have a look at a real-world example. So this is from one of the customers that I was working with in the early days of live update. They had an AIX system running WebSphere. This was a PowerVC managed environment, so all their AIX VMs were deployed through PowerVC. So we needed to integrate in with PowerVC in order to do the live update operation. And they had a system running AIX 7.2 TL2 SP1, and they wanted to move to SP2 and install an iFix. They wanted to do all of that without rebooting. So they wanted to test live update to see what would happen. So we essentially went through my list of best practices. So the first thing we did was, of course, create a clone of our current and existing root binary group. So we use alt disk copy with the -B flag because we don't want to boot off this disk. We simply want to have that disk sitting around should we need to back out and recover and go back to the previous state after the live update operation. So we created the clone, and then the next step was to check the kernel build version. And the way to do that is by catting the /proc/version file. And you will see some output here that tells you the date and timestamp and the build version of the kernel. And the only way that information will ever change is if you patch the operating system and reboot, or if you patch the operating system and run a live update. So this is a really, really good way of verifying 100% that you are running on an updated kernel after a live update operation. We then confirm that we're definitely running SP1. The next thing we do is authenticate with their PowerVC management server. So the LPAR from where we're performing the live update must be able to talk to the PowerVC server, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So we run a command called PVC auth. We specify the username and password for PowerVC and the PowerVC server name. That then gives us a PowerVC token, which means we're now authenticated to talk directly to the PowerVC server and have it perform operations for us. So if you're not overly familiar with live updates, the reason that we need that is so that the LPAR itself, the one that's being updated, can talk to the PowerVC server and say, hey, can you please create me a surrogate VM that looks just like I do, so create a clone of myself. So we can send commands to the PowerVC server to go off and create that VM. Without that authentication, live update can't work. It's exactly the same if you're using a HMC. There's a HMC auth command that you can run, so you can talk directly to the HMC to create the surrogate LPAR profile and so forth. So we needed to get that authentication in place. Then we installed our fixes, update all, verify that the service pack is now installed. So we're running SP2 now. We then went ahead and installed the iFix, and then we committed all applied file sets. Now, historically, what you would do here is you've installed your fixes, you would reboot. But because we're performing a live update operation, we're not going to do that. We simply go into the next step here where we perform a live update. Now you can see here that I've said you would run a gen install -kp. Now that P flag is a preview. And you should always run a preview before you actually kick off the real live update. And if that comes back successful, then you can go ahead and perform the gen install -k, which is the actual live update process. And this is what you will see. The first thing it does is it comes back and tells you this is the estimated blockout time and the total operation time of the live update. Now The blackout time is essentially the time it's going to take for it to pause and then resume the workload from the original to the surrogate VM. So that's an important time to know. And the total operation time is a little less important, but it gives you an overall time for all the other operations that occur during a live update, such as provisioning the surrogate VM, performing the disk mirroring, and so forth. So that's going to take over 20 minutes to complete the whole thing, but the important time here is the blackout time, because that's us moving the workload from one VM to the surrogate VM. Then we go through and perform quite a lot of checks around storage, so volume groups, paging spaces, dump devices, making sure we have enough space for all of those on the available disk. We then do a memory check to make sure we have the minimum amount of memory assigned to the LPAR, which is 2 gig on AIX 7.2. And then we perform a raft of other checks, which I'm not going to talk about all of them, but what I'm looking for here is passed on the left-hand side. So if I see passed all the way down the bottom here, then I know that we are in good shape and live update is not going to fail. And again, we get all the way to the bottom here, they've all passed, and then we kick off the actual live update process. So at this point, we're still running on the original VM. We haven't moved workload across. None of that has actually taken place yet. So now we start the actual live update process. We provision the surrogate VM. We start it up, and then we move the workload from the surrogate to the, from the original to the surrogate, and that's when the blackout time kicks in. So this is between here and here, the start and an end that you can see here. That's when we're moving the workload from one VM to the other. Once that's completed, we can shut down the original because we no longer need it. Our workload is now running on the patched kernel, on the new surrogate VM, and the original LPAR can be removed from the system. Once you see that, everything looks good, live update completed, and that looks like it has completed successfully. So that's what you want to see in a typical live update. Now, to verify that it has actually done what we expect, we can verify that the kernel build version has updated. So we cap that /proc/version file again. You can see it's now March 2018 date and timestamp, and the kernel build version has changed as well. So we know for sure that we're definitely running on the updated kernel. So the whole point of that best practice number 2 was just remember that you should install your fixes like you always have using install P or the eFix manager, and then run the live update operation with the gen install -k command. So just keep that in mind. As I said, it was a little bit hazy to begin with when we first brought out live updates because a lot of the examples would show you running the command, specifying the fixes as well during that command, and people became very confused about, can I install fixes like I always did, or do I have to use gen install? So the point is here, as a best practice, no, you don't have to use gen install. You can continue doing what you've always done and then run the live update operation. Okay, so best practice number 3. So this applies to PowerVC managed environments. So if you're using PowerVC to deploy AIX VMs and you would like to perform live updates on those AIX VMs, I recommend that you add this property, network allocate retries, to the nova.conf file on your PowerVC server. And change that property to a value of at least 10. Now, the reason I say that is because if you don't, it is likely that you'll see error messages similar to what I have on the screen here, where it says, failed to delete a virtual Ethernet adapter on the virtual machine, or cannot delete a virtual Ethernet adapter on the virtual machine because the HMC operation, etc., HTTP errors. And the PowerVC logs will also say things like failed to delete a virtual Ethernet adapter on the virtual machine as well, again with a HTTP error. By setting this option here, what we're doing is actually giving PowerVC the capability of retrying that operation multiple times until it gets the response that it expects. What's happening here is that PowerVC is telling the LPAR to delete the virtual Ethernet adapter. It's actually happening, but it's not getting the response it wants in the time that it expects, and it's saying that it's failed. So even though it's saying it's failed, it has actually delivered the adapter, and it's a false message, but it can cause concern for customers when they see that, so it's best that we try and avoid that altogether. So by changing this network allocate retries to 10 in the nova.conf file and restarting the PowerVC server, we can avoid this problem altogether. Now, one of the questions that all... Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a couple of people saying that they're having problems hearing you properly. Is it possible to turn up the volume at all?
I can try, yes.
Okay.
Let's see if that's any better.
Little. And just a reminder to people on the call, if you want to ask questions, just put them into the chat window and we'll take them at the end. I know Gareth and Nigel have been answering some of them, so thank you for that, and we'll take them at the end. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Jodie. So one of the questions that I'm often asked is, why is it trying to delete virtual Ethernet adapters in the first place? And that's an excellent question. If you're not overly familiar with live updates, you may not know what's actually happening under the covers here. So let me spend a minute talking about why that's happening. So when we perform a live update, we create we have the original LPAR and we have a surrogate VM. What happens is we create a little virtual network between those two LPARs, and we use that network to transfer the VM from the original to the surrogate. So we actually add a virtual Ethernet adapter to the original and to the surrogate, create a private network over the hypervisor. We then move the VM across, the workload across, and then when we're done, we can delete that virtual Ethernet adapter because we no longer need it. It's simply a temporary device used temporarily for the transfer of the workload from one VM to the other. So that's why we have these particular messages. So if you're using PowerVC to manage AIX live updates, this is something that you probably want to implement so that you don't have these worrying error messages appear in your console. Best practice number 4. So in my previous example, if I go back to this screen here, it told me that the blackout time, the estimated blackout time, would be 12 seconds. What was the actual blackout time? How do I know that without trying to get some sort of gut feel or instinct around what it was? Well, fortunately, you can use the alog command, and the alog command with the -T MOBTE flag will show you the blackout time. At the very bottom of that output, it says blackout is 11.42 seconds. So it wasn't quite 12 seconds, but it's close enough. So that's the best way to find out what the blackout time is from a live update operation. Another best practice for people that are using live updates with PowerVC managed environments. If you run this command more than once, you may find that over time, you may find that you see this error message here where it says not all root VG volumes are boot volumes in PowerVC. And what can happen is that sometimes the PowerVC database and what's on the LPAR can become out of sync. And it may not know that some of those disks are actually part of the boot set, if you like, or part of a root volume group. So the way to fix that and to prevent that error message from appearing is by clicking on the VM in the PowerVC user interface, clicking on Edit Details, clicking on Volume Details, going down to the boot set, and changing the option where it says No to a Yes on the appropriate disk, and clicking on Save. And that will prevent that error message from appearing again. And this is something that we've stumbled across numerous times when we're using PowerVC and have reported it back to the appropriate people so that we can try and have that resolved going forward. But for now, it's the only way really to get around this little particular issue that we've encountered on a couple of occasions. Number 6 is a very important best practice. Please read the live update restrictions and limitations resources before you attempt to use the tool. There are currently many restrictions and limitations that exist with live updates, so it's really a good idea to become aware of those, understand them, understand what the constraints are, and evaluate if they will impact your environment or not. It will save you some headaches and some disappointment down the track. So read these 2 links. So we have the restrictions and the limitations here on both of them. For example, things that have popped up on more than one occasion. We've had some people try and do live updates on AIX LPARs that have either virtual or physical tape drives attached. Unfortunately, that's not currently supported with live update, and it's well documented in the restrictions link here. So had you read that information, you would know that you would not be able to use live update with tape drives assigned to the LPAR. Also, another one that has cropped up on more than one occasion is GPFS, or Spectrum Scale File System, currently not supported with live update. And we've had people try and do live updates. It's come back and told us that the kernel extension is currently loaded. It's not a safe and known kernel extension, so live update will fail as a result. And the only way to get around that is by stopping GPFS, which sort of defeats the purpose of live updates altogether if you have to stop applications with the user file systems. So again, it is documented in the restrictions and limitations links. So my point here is that you should read this information. It's very, very valuable and may save you some time and disappointment later. Best practice number 7. Did you know that you can actually try live updates without applying any updates? Sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but it is actually true. So you don't have to have a TL of a service pack or even an iFix on hand in order to test live updates. And in fact, this capability is a really, really good way of testing live updates in a crash and burn environment or an old production environment to understand what happens during a live update, so you can understand the mechanics a bit better, and also understand what impact it may have to a running application before you actually go and attack your production systems with this particular feature. So AIX Live Update has been designed to be completely transparent to the running apps, so you can try it pretty much straight away as long as you have a supported environment that will work with live updates. And to simply test it, all you need to do is run the gen install -k-p command. And again, the P is the preview. And if that comes back as OK with no errors, so everything passes, then the live update operation is probably going to be fine to continue, so you can then go ahead and do a gen install -k. And that will perform the actual live update operation without applying any updates. So what happens here is that we will provision the surrogate LPAR, move the workload across. It doesn't update AIX, it's running the same level, the same TL and service pack, but you've been able to test the live update process to see what happens and understand what's going on under the covers a little better and getting yourself a little more comfortable with the feature and the tool and how to use it. Best practice number 8. Ensure that these file sets are installed on your AIX system. So rtex.base.rtu, rct.basic.rtu. And the reason I say you should ensure those file sets are installed is because we ran into a problem a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, where a customer was trying to run a live update. It failed with a rather esoteric error message, and after some digging we found that what the problem was is that this file set here, RCT Basic, was not installed. We found that in a hidden log file that really wasn't the classic sort of log file that we look at for live update issues. And what we found was that the RCT Basic file set was not installed. What happened here was that when you use live updates, it needs a file set called boss.liveupdate.rtu. And when you install that file set, it's supposed to check that these two file sets are already installed, so RTX and RCT Basic. What was happening though was that you could install that file set without those file sets being installed. So it wasn't actually doing its proper prerequisite check when you installed it. They went ahead and fixed this in TL3, so it's no longer an issue. But I still have come across someone as recently as a few months ago that hit this problem. So the workaround here is to install those two file sets, and then everything will be fine, or to install the fix, or to at least move to the latest TL and service pack before you try using live update. So it's always a good idea to be on the latest TL and service pack if you're about to start using live update for the first time. Best practice number 9. We have a utility called CLV Update. This utility is very handy for troubleshooting and resolving issues with AIX Live Update. It's also packaged and included with the boss.liveupdate.rtu file set. When we first introduced live updates, this was an undocumented and unsupported command. We now have full support for it, and we even have documentation, which is fantastic. This tool is very, very handy for troubleshooting problems with live update, particularly if you've had a live update go bad. If you've had a live update problem where the live update has either hung or not finished completely, and you're left in a situation where you have the surrogate and the original LPARs still operating, that you're really not sure why they're still there or why it's failed, but the CLV update command can actually help you troubleshoot that problem. I've only really had to use this once or twice in the last 5 years, and I would still recommend that if you run into that kind of problem, you should speak to IBM support or even someone from IBM Web Services and get some help with that before you try running this command on your own. However, if you're already familiar with live updates and you haven't maybe used it a few times, this command can help you clean up an environment before you attempt to run another live update operation. Now, the 2 times that I've had to do this where this command has helped is a customer had run a live update. It had provisioned the surrogate. The workload had transitioned from the original to the surrogate VM, but for some reason the live update process had hung, and the original LPAR was still there, and it was in a very unknown and strange state. So we simply ran the CLV update command on its own, and it came back and told us you need to run it with some additional flags. We ran those, it then came back again and said you should run it with some other flags. And eventually what happened was that it cleaned up the environment for us. So it removed the original partition, it put the live update status and kernel into a known and good state, and we were back in a position where we could continue running with another live update operation. So it's just something to be aware of should you run into problems. This is a very handy tool for helping you troubleshoot those issues. And speaking of troubleshooting, if you're looking at a live update problem, your first port of call or source of truth should be in the var adm res live update logs lv up the log file. It's a long name, but it is a very good log file for working out why live update has failed. Should you run into any problems with live update and you're logging a case with IBM, this is the log file the support team will most definitely want to look at. And what we recommend that you do is you collect that log file with other information that they will want to see in that case. So they actually have a link here to a support page that will tell you what the live kernel update must gather information is. And what I recommend you do is you run through that process, collect all the data before you open the case so you can submit it, and you will then avoid lengthy delays in getting your case actioned where they come back and say, please collect this data, please collect this data, etc. So make sure you have a look at that link. Now, I have used this information extensively in the past for troubleshooting and debugging live update issues. And what I found is that it's very verbose, as you expect in this file. So there's lots of information, warning, debug messages. But the information that you want to look at specifically for failing live update operations is like looking at this command here with a grep -w and an uppercase error. And that will come back with pretty much a direct hit for why live update is failing. I found it very, very efficient way of finding a live update problem, and it gives you a fairly good clue as to what the problem might be. So if live update is failing, please run this command first, and it may tell you where the problem lies, and it may give you some very good pointers as to where you can resolve problems and why live update has failed. So here's an example from my lab environment where I grepped for the error, word error from the log file, and it came back and told me that it could not remove some missing paths and it could not remove some old disk entries. And when I went and looked at my environment, they were absolutely correct. I had a whole bunch of missing paths, I had a whole bunch of missing disks, a whole bunch of dead devices lying around because it was in my lab environment. It was a bit of a mess. So I simply had to go and clean all of that up, make sure that they were all gone, and all the paths and disks that were there were active, and I had 2 paths, etc. Everything looked healthy. Once I did that, I reran the live update operation, and everything was good to go. So just keep that in mind if you're troubleshooting live updates. Grep for error from that live update log file, and it may give you a very good clue as to why things are failing and how to fix it. The next one is also another PowerVC best practice for live updates. If you're using PowerVC to manage the environment and you're performing live updates, this is a really good way of cleaning up the resources that are left behind after a live update. If you've used live update before, you will know that immediately after a live update is completed, there is an additional volume group lying around called lvup_rootvg. That volume group is essentially the volume group and the boot disk that we use to bring up the surrogate partition. And we need that there immediately after a live update because we still have a couple of processes running from some hidden file systems in that volume group. But after you've performed a live update or you've rebooted down the track, that volume group is no longer required. So how do you clean that up? Well, in a PowerVC managed environment, there is a command, a utility that you can use to clean that up nicely rather than doing it manually, which could leave some devices in an orphan state either on the LPAR or on the PowerVC server. So we use a command called clv_update-V, and that will go and delete the volume group, the devices, and everything on the PowerVC side as well, so that it removes it all very nice and cleanly. So here's an example where we had an LPAR that has previously been updated using live update. we rebooted it. It's only been up for 1 minute. And you can see here we have root VG, which is currently active, and we have the LV up root VG, which is no longer active. So we can actually get rid of this volume group now. So to do that properly within a PowerVC managed environment, you would then authenticate with the PowerVC server, get a token so that you can talk to PowerVC, and then you would run the CLV update -v flag to have it go and clean up the temporary storage from the PowerVC server. So that actually removes the disk on the AIX side, but also removes the disks from the PowerVC server and from the storage provider on PowerVC. And you'll see messages in the PowerVC user interface under messages saying that it was able to detach and delete the volume successfully from the VM. Another question that we're often asked is there a non-disruptive rollback option? So can I get back to the previous state that I was in without a reboot? Well, it is possible with iFixes. So you can remove an iFix and then simply kick off another live update operation. So that will easily get you back to the way you were before you installed the iFix. So that's non-disruptive. But if you wanted to go back to the points prior to installing a service pack or a technology level, well, we don't have a way to really reject those. So the only way to do that would be to reboot off the root VG clone that you created prior to the live update. And that will get you back to the previous TL or service pack that you were on before you started the live update operation. So from a rollback point of view, yes, with iFixes, not really with service packs and technology levels. It's still an outage in order to reboot off the alternate root VG clone. And 13, which is really my last best practice that I want to talk about, is make sure that you remove any missing disk paths with the rm path command before you perform a live update. And this goes back to my previous example from my lab, and also from some customer systems where we've tried to perform a live update and it has failed because of missing paths to disks. Now, typically on an AIX system, these sorts of issues don't really offer any functional issues to the running AIX system. But with live update, it can introduce errors and failures, and it can be difficult to troubleshoot if you don't know where to look straight away. So here's an example from a customer system where they have a bunch of missing paths to some disks. We simply went ahead and removed those, and then live update was able to successfully complete at that point. This has also been now documented in the best practice, official best practice from IBM as well. So this is something you should go and read as well when you're starting to plan your live update operation. Now, one of the things that I've done recently is I submitted an RFE so that when we perform a live update preview operation, we go and check for this. It would be really nice if they could tell us that, hey, you've got some missing paths. You might want to clean that up before you go any further with the live update operation. So I raised an RFE to try and have live update enhanced to include that output, or an option to include that output, so that we can be warned of this before we start the live update operation. So if you're so inclined, please go ahead and vote for that RFE. It would be much appreciated. Some other considerations. So we're often asked, well, what is the typical blackout time for an AIX live update? And what I have here is basically some conversations and some data that I collected from other customers, from some other consultants, from our development teams. And what we've generally found, and this is not going to be the same for everyone, but what we've found generally speaking is that if you have a lab environment that has no real workload, the blackout time is going to be around a 15-second time frame. But if you have real-world workload on an active system, it's more likely to be closer to 30 to 45 seconds for that blackout period where we pause and resume the workload from the original to the surrogate VM. We have done extensive testing with Oracle, and we've found that recovers fine. Everything is able to reconnect without any problems. And what we're generally telling people now is that if your application works well in a PowerHA active-passive configuration, then it should work relatively well with live update as well. Of course, as we find new data, we'll continue to update the information that we find, and I'll put it in the best practices as well. But that's generally what we're seeing in most of the engagements that we work on. Another common problem that we've come across and people come to us with is we don't have enough CPU to adopt live update. And the issue here is that because we're creating a surrogate, it's essentially a complete copy of the original, which means if you have 10 cores and 100 gigabytes of memory, you need to have 10 cores and 100 gigabytes of memory free on your power system to perform a live update. Not everyone has that luxury. So we do have a couple of options, and I'll talk about more later, but the two primary ones that we have that can help people get over that adoption hurdle is you can actually run live update with a CPU reduction option. And what that does is it will reduce the entitled capacity of the surrogate partition during the live update process. So it'll reduce it all the way down to almost the minimum. And once we're done, we will then add that controlled capacity back to the LPAR once we've deleted the original. And that is hopefully going to be enough to squeeze you through on a live update operation. We don't play with any of the virtual processor settings. It's only the entitled capacity, the desired entitled capacity that we will try to reduce, help you get across the line for live update. We have other options which I'll talk about in a minute, but that's one way to get around that. The other option, which has only been introduced in the last year or so, is live update across frames. So now we can actually move your LPAR to another frame where you may have capacity, perform the live update, and then move it back. So if you have another box somewhere else that has capacity, we can move you over there, live update you, and then bring you back again. That's a really nice feature. One known issue that I wanted to mention, which I don't see too often anymore, but it was certainly coming up last year. People that were running TL3 SP2 on 7.2, if you tried to use live update to move to SP3, you would find that it would fail with an error very much similar to this. So we get all the way through the live update process, start moving the workload to the surrogate LPAR, and during the blackout time, it would fail, which was quite disappointing. You would see messages such as can't send message, and you would see these meta checkpoint cluster restart messages as well in the PowerVC log file. And what was happening here was that there was a network issue between the original and the surrogate VM. There was a bug with our boss.net.tcp client file set that was causing the operation to fail. The good news is, though, is we provided a fix for that, so you can install the iFix and then simply run live update, and you'd be good to go. And of course, hopefully most people are now moving to TL4 of 7.2 anyway, so again, it's another advertisement for making sure if you're about to adopt live updates, please move to the latest TL and service pack to avoid any of these known issues that we've had around for a little while now. Okay, some other options that you have with live update, which I definitely recommend that you check out if you have the capability. In 2017, we introduced live update with Power Enterprise pools. So if you have a Power Enterprise tool and you're constrained for resources, live update can actually borrow a resource from that pool during the live update, either CPU or memory, assign it to the surrogate VM, perform the live update, complete it, and then give the resources back once it's done. And there's no admin steps required for that capability. It will simply detect that you have a Power Enterprise pool and will use those temporarily on a temporary basis simply to do the live update and move you back. That was actually introduced in 2017, so that's been out for a little while now. Also in 2017, we introduced support for PowerVC, and this will work with both a HMC or a NovaLink PowerVC environment. And the really good thing about PowerVC is it really simplifies the configuration and the administration steps required to use live update. Essentially, when you use PowerVC, it can do pretty much everything for you. It's all automated. It does all the storage provisioning, it does all the live update configuration for you. There's nothing that the administrator really needs to do other than authenticate with the PowerVC server to make this work. And it also put us in a really good position to take advantage of live partition mobility with live updates, which is the next slide. So in 2018, we introduced integration with LPM. So now we can perform a live update by moving you to another frame where you may have capacity, and that's typically the reason why you would do this. So if you're running out of CPU or memory on your existing frame and you can't perform a live update there, but you want to stay on that frame, we can move you somewhere else, perform the live update, and bring you back again. And that's also a very simple thing to do. There's a simple option in the live update configuration file that you set. You authenticate with the PowerVC server, and the rest is done automatically for you. So that was 2018 that we introduced that feature. And this is a slide that I stole from Nigel. In fact, he was nice enough to give me a copy because I really liked it. So here we have an S924 running AIX. We want update AIX using live update on this particular VM here, but we don't have any spare capacity on this box. So this is where live update with LPM is very, very handy. We essentially LPM you to this other box over here, this 950 that we have that has the spare CPU and memory. We perform the live update, and then when we're done, we move you back again. So you're back on the S924, back where you started. So it's a very, very nice feature by a completely automated process. And another configuration item that we introduced in 2018 is the live update CPU reduction, which I mentioned earlier. Again, this is something you enable in the live update configuration file. And what it does is it will try and reduce the entitled capacity of the surrogate VM when we create it to as low as it possibly can. So it'll go all the way down to the minimum, if possible, on the entitled capacity, perform the live update, and then we will return that entitled capacity back to its prior setting once we've finished the live update operation. And that is supported with PowerVC and HMC managed environments. So if you don't have PowerVC in the environment, this could be one way to get around any adoption hurdles you may have for live updates. With AIX 72TL4, we introduced an enhancement to the preview capability. So the preview capability was enhanced so that it produced a little less information. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we have a TL3 live update operation, preview operation. And you can see it's quite verbose, gives you a lot of information, telling you a lot of things were done and passed. But someone obviously argued, obviously successfully, that this was too much information. How about just telling us about things that are failing or exceptions and reduce the amount of output that is produced? So with TL4, we had done that with the preview operation. So now you get a very succinct level of output. It tells you the blackout time, and then it simply says that live update preview succeeded. You don't get any of this additional information about things passing on the left-hand side. I personally preferred all this information over here because I could see what was being checked and what I needed to know about in order to run a live update. But this is much neater and much cleaner. But I wanted to check and see what would happen if there was an actual exception or an error in the preview operation. So I removed my PowerVC token and ran the preview operation. So -install -kp, and it came back and told me that you don't have a valid authentication with the PowerVC console. And the nice thing about this is it actually gives you some idea of what to check and potentially how to resolve the problem, which is very, very nice. So it tells me you should run PVC with -L, and that will tell you if you have an authentication token. And then that you may need to run the PVC auth command again to re-authenticate with the PowerVC server. That's just a small enhancement they've made to live update in the most recent technology level for AIX 7.2. And one thing I wanted to share with people is that Oracle and AIX Live Kernel Update are now completely certified. So Oracle have come back in conjunction with IBM after their testing and said that we now support Live Update in 12C, 18C, and 19C environments. And they now consider this part of the base AIX, which means they will no longer need to recertify in the future, which is fantastic. And also good news is that Oracle didn't have to change anything on their side to get this working. So they're fully supported, and they've actually released a little white paper talking about that, which you can go and read, and I have a link for it as well. Some other reference material. So I highly recommend that you check out the AIX 7.2 Knowledge Center for Live Update. That is your source of truth for everything to do with Live Update. If you're very new to it, then you want to go and read this as soon as possible. That will give you a very good introduction to Live Update, what's required and how it works. And then we have what I call my how-to guide. It's the how to update your AIX system without a reboot presentation from TechGear in 2018. And that will talk you through a couple of scenarios, one around using a HMC managed environment, another one using PowerVC, and it is a step-by-step what you need to do to set up everything to make it work. So it's not best practices, it's the how to get Live Update working in your environment guide. So you can download that and have a look at it. And then, of course, I have a link to my blog where I have basically this presentation in document form, which is my AIX Live Updates best practices for 2020. And I'll continue to update that as the years and months move on. And the last two links I wanted to point out were we have some white papers that talk about real-world experiences using Live Update with Oracle and IBM's DB2 database. They're both very good references, so you can see what we did with our development teams in testing and using Live Update in a real workload scenario and any of the guides and changes we had to make that a successful thing. So definitely recommend checking those out as well. And the only link I wanted to point out here was Dave Sheffield has a video on YouTube that introduces you to Live Update. Now, Dave Sheffield, if you don't know, is basically the lead architect for Live Updates. So he's the guy that was running and designing the entire project, and he talks you through what Live Update is, how it works, and some of the new features when TL1 came out for AIX 7.2. I definitely recommend taking the time to read that, to listen to that. It doesn't go for very long. It's quite short, but it's a very informative video. Now, I did mention at the very top of this presentation that I do work for Lab Services, so I did want to make people aware that Lab Services worldwide have a presentation and an engagement that we can offer you where we can come on site for a couple of days, work with you on a proof of concept for Live Updates. We can take you through the whole process in a proof of concept environment so you become familiar with how it works and hopefully get you a little more comfortable with the technology so that you may think about adopting it in your non-production environments and then eventually in your production environments, which would be very nice. Well, that was all I had for my best practices. I hope that people have found it useful. I really appreciate people taking the time to come and listen to me, especially with what's happening around the world at the moment. I hope everyone stays safe and well. And at this point, I suppose we've got a few minutes left. Jody, if there's any questions that we want to discuss now,
Sure.
I'd be happy to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking us through all those top tips and hints. So there have been quite a few questions in the chat, and Nigel and Gareth have been going through those. Just trying to see if there's any that haven't been answered. I think most of them have. Just checking.
There's one there with the CPU reduction. Will that increase the blackout time?
No, it won't. So the only that's one of the reasons why we use a private network between the original and the surrogate VM, so that we have a high-speed network, and that's really what contributes to the blackout time is the speed of the network.
Any news on that is going to be bizarre, Linux on power? What about the Linux live update? Are they doing anything similar? I'm not aware of anything.
No, I can't say I'm aware of anything on that space, no.
Yeah, just a reboot for Linux. One thing is, when I started, it's Nigel speaking, on the early days, it was like 6 failures, and then I got one to work. It was like cheering in the streets. But that was like 6 years ago. I mean, things have bedded down. They've worked very heavily on nailing down the corners. And these days, if you have a clean copy of AIX, no duff paths or bits of broken disks hanging about, that's usually worked. Don't they, first time?
It does. It's much more mature now. So we've had a number of customers that have been testing it, a couple here in Australia, a couple in the US, and a couple in Europe as well. And, things are now starting to look very mature, very robust from that space. And as I said earlier, we have the development team continuing to work on it as well. So they're listening. So if we have issues, they are more than happy to help us out with those problems and add new features, fix problems as we find them. And that's one of the reasons why it's now so robust.
Agreed. My experience as well. Go on, Jyoti.
That's okay. Talking about new features, the RFE that Chris has referred to, I'll put the link on in the chat window for that. And I will post the replay, both the recording and the slide deck a bit later on today, and send emails with all the links as per usual. So the presentation, normally I would add useful links to both the wiki page and in the replay email, but there are so many that Chris has put into the slide deck. I think I will refer just to the slide deck. There's very many useful features in links in there. So thanks, it's really useful. There is a question that came to me privately, which is if there are missing file sets caused failures, this will be shown in the preview command. Is that correct? And if so, how would you include them during live update process to get a preview to be successful?
an interesting question. I'm not quite sure what they're referring to, but if there are missing file sets preventing live update from working, that would be recorded in the live update log file. Now, this is something that I have seen on a couple of occasions. It simply fails, doesn't tell you why, and that's why you need to go digging into the live update log file to find out what they are, and then you need to get them installed before you can continue on and get live update up and running.
Okay, thank you. And I think those are the last of the questions that I can see. I just want to, before I stop the recording, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks to Chris for taking us through all those, as I said, top tips and hints, and also to Nigel Griffiths and Gareth Coates from the ATS team in Europe for answering some of those questions.
Most welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your time. We'll hang around for a few minutes after the recording has stopped. I am setting up new sessions from April onwards. I'll post information about those as and when available in the usual manner. So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording there.